Namaskar. Today I am going to discuss protected areas. Ecosystem varies in their degree of disturbances by human activities. For instance, there are ecosystems which are totally unaffected by human disturbance or human activities. For example, deep sea ocean communities or tropical rainforest of Amazon. There are few ecosystems which are totally affected or modified by human activities, anthropogenic activities or anthropogenic disturbances. For example, urban areas, agricultural lands, artificial ponds, river, streams or natural forest. So, the ecosystem vary in their degree of disturbances by human activity. Still, there are number of population, communities or species which can be saved or conserved. For example, in a logged forest, there will be species which can be conserved. In a fished ocean or in a grazed ecosystem, grazed grassland, species can be protected. So, protected areas are cornerstones of ecosystem conservations. The importance of protected area range from conservation of biodiversity, storehouse of genetic resources, ecosystem services, and it also contributes to the sustainable development. Protected area also contributes for human well-being, poverty alleviation, food and water security, and fulfillment of Millennium Developmental Goal. The protected area, in other words, we can say, the implementation of protected areas is an extension to the concept of protection of biodiversity. Protected areas, importance of these areas is well recognized by international organizations, national governments, local groups, communities and indigenous groups. They vary in their degree of protection. There are different management approaches for protected areas. If we see the history of protected area, we see that protection or conservation of natural resources is an artifact of human civilization. These conservation of natural resources is enshrined, is inculcated with the dawn of human civilization. If we take the example of Indian condition, in India, long back, around 2000 years back, since then the biodiversity or natural resources are protected. Likewise, in many countries and different parts of the world, the natural resources are protected. They are an integral part of indigenous communities' cultural and social beliefs. But in true sense, the first true national park, it came into existence in 1872, which is Yellowstone National Park in United States. Yellowstone National Park provides not only the recreation activity, but it is important in conservation of various species. The second national park was created in Australia in the wilds south of Sydney in 1879. In 1885, Canada gave protection to its hot spring, which is in the valley of Rocky Mountain, and a part of this hot spring came into existence as the Banff National Park. After this, the number of national parks or protected area came into existence by different countries. If we see the definition of protected area, in protected area can be or are the areas of lands or sea which are determined by the law or by the traditional community for the preservation, for the conservation of biological diversity along with its cultural and religious resources. If we go by the definition given by United Nations Environmental Programme in 2016, the protected areas are a clearly defined geographical space, recognized, dedicated and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve the long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural value. According to Wildlife Protection Act 1972, A protected area, in India, it is given that a protected area means a national park, a sanctuary, a conservation reserve, or a community reserve, which is notified under section 18, 35, 36A, 30 and 36C of the Act. The protected areas definition vary, and the objective of the protected area vary from different countries to country, but the main goal is conservation of biodiversity, conservation of species, conservation of habitat. For establishment and for a protected area can be established by government action. It may be a national government, regional or local level. It can be established by land purchases by an individual community or by conservation organization. The protected area can be developed as in the form of biological field station for the purpose of conservation as well as scientific research and education by various universities or other organizations, and it can be established by action of indigenous people and traditional society. The government action and land use alone cannot establish a protected area, though it provide a platform. The various organizations, international conservation organization, various universities, research organization, education, scientific research, and financed by different developed country together can establish a protected area. A protected area is also established by indigenous people. The indigenous people, traditional people, they have protected their land and their livelihood since long. But in the form of protected area, in the form of proper monitoring, management, funding, the protected area can be established legally as well. There are number of species in the earth. We have till now we know that there are 9 million species in the form of plants, different plants that may be smaller to larger, animals, fungi, bacteria, etc. So what should be the priority for the conservation or preservation of a species or ecosystem? The three pertinent questions are: what should be protected, where should be protected, and how they should be protected. If we see the prioritization, there are three aspects which should be taken care while setting up a protected area. The first thing is distinctiveness, the second is endangerment, and third is utility. Distinctiveness means the species should be distinct. It should be of distinct texture. It may be a rare endemic species which is endemic to a particular area, which is not very common, which is not found everywhere, but it is found in a specific location, endemic to a specific area. It can be a species which is genetically different from other community, other species, so it should be distinct. A distinct species should be given a priority for preservation, for conservation. The second is endangerment. The species, there are number of species which are extinct. So the priority should be given to the species which are facing the danger of extinction. In the other sense, critically endangered or endangered. For example, there are whooping cranes, the number is 350, and there are sandhill cranes, the number is 50,000. So the priority for protection of an ecosystem will be given to the whooping crane whose number is only 350, because they are facing the danger of extinction, they are endangered. The third priority is the utility value. How much is the value of that particular species or particular ecosystem? For example, the wild variety of wheat will be given priority for preservation instead of a variety which is, or instead of a species which is of no use to humans. So these three criteria, distinctness, endangerment and utility, should be given prioritization for making an ecosystem protective. Based upon these three areas, there are different approaches for prioritization. One is species approach, ecosystem approach and hotspot approach. Species approach deals with the preservation or conservation of the species which is either rare, endangered or critically endangered, or it may be a flagship species like tiger, panda in India. It may be an indicator species, it may be an umbrella species, keystone species, number of species which are having their own importance in their own ecosystem. So, these approach can be applied in an ecosystem for the prioritization approach for preservation or conservation. Then ecosystem approach. The conservation biologists, many of our opinion that the amount which is being spent in the protection of one species, if it is around 1 million, the same amount can be utilized for the conservation of an ecosystem. And by conserving that ecosystem, we are able to conserve more species, more habitat. So, ecosystem approach deals with the ecosystem conservation. Ecosystem conservation approach is also more visible to the policy planner or to the financer in terms of flood control, watershed management or other gains. Then the third approach is hotspot approach. Hotspot approach deals with the conservation of the habitat or ecosystem or species which are very endemic to a particular ecosystem. There are number of vertebrate species which are endemic to a particular ecosystem. With these endemic species of plants, there may be again mosses, biophytes, algae and number of other species which can be protected, which are endemic. The hotspot approach like Conservation International has identified 34 hotspots of biodiversity. This is also one approach for conservation of biodiversity. Same way in England, there are plant biodiversity center which more than 250 centers which are preserving or conserving the plant biodiversity. So, protected area can be identified on the basis of species, ecosystem or hotspot approach, and the species or ecosystem should be preserved on the basis of distinctness, utility and the third one is endangerment. Now, there are certain points which should be remembered before designing a protected area. These four are called 4 R's for designing protected area. These 4 R's are representation, resiliency, redundancy and reality. The representation reflects that it should be able to represent many aspects of biodiversity in the form of species, community, population. Resiliency means that the protected area should be sufficiently large, so it should be able to include all aspects of biodiversity for a foreseeable future. Redundancy includes enough example of different aspects of biodiversity for long-term conservation, and reality means that there should be sufficient fund and political will to protect these protected area. So, these 4 R's should be taken care of before designing the protected areas: representation, resiliency, redundancy and reality. If we see the protected area categorization system, the United Nations in 1994 categorized the protected areas into various categories. These categories are voluntary. No nation is being compelled to adopt these categories, but IUCN has categorized these. The IUCN has been entrusted with the charge to make or to compile or to make an inventory of the protected area all over the world. So, on the basis of this category, the IUCN has compiled the protected area which are found all over the world, whether they are terrestrial protected area or marine protected area. So, category 1A is strict natural reserve. This category deals with the protected area which is managed mainly for science. Then category 1B, this is wilderness area, which is protected area managed mainly for wilderness protection. Then category 2, this includes national park. This is a protected area managed mainly for ecosystem protection and recreation. Category 3 deals with natural monuments, protected area which is managed mainly for conservation of special natural features. Then category 5, it is habitat, species management area. It deals with protected area managed mainly for conservation through management intervention. And category 5, this is protected landscapes, seascapes. This is protected area managed mainly for landscapes, seascapes, conservation and recreation. Then category 6, this is managed resource protected area. This protected area managed mainly for the sustainable use of natural ecosystem. So IUCN has given 6 categories for the protected area conservation. The protection of biodiversity is also enshrined in Convention of Biological Diversity. As we know that Convention of Biological Diversity is a main thing for which gives the conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use of biodiversity and efficient utilization of resources in a present system, equitable sharing of resources, equitable sharing of profits arising out of resources. So CBD in its Conference of Party, in 7th Conference of Party, has identified a target for reducing a significant amount of biodiversity in 2010 as far as terrestrial ecosystem is concerned, and 2012 for marine ecosystem. This was also adopted in Johannesburg World Summit in 2002. In its 11th Conference of Party, the Aichi biodiversity targets have been identified, which are called strategic biodiversity targets for 2011 to 2006. In this Aichi biodiversity target, the target 11 specifically deals on protected area. This target says it aims at better tracking progress on the coverage, management and efficiency of the global protected area network across the globe. According to the Aichi Biodiversity Target 11 on protected area, it says that by 2020, at least 17% of terrestrial and inland water, 10% of coastal and marine areas, especially areas of particular importance for biodiversity and ecosystem services, are to be conserved through effectively and equitably managed, ecologically representative and well-connected system of protected areas and other effective areas based conservation measures, and integrated into the wider landscapes and seascape. So, the protected area are also represented in Aichi Biodiversity Target or Convention of Biological Diversity. If we see coverage of the world's protected areas, we will find that in 2014 United Nations list contains that the number of protected area is 2,09,429, which cover a total area of almost 32 million kilometers square. Among this, 3.41% of the world's marine area are protected and 14% of the world terrestrial areas are protected. You can see that number of percentage of marine area which is protected under the protected area is less. There are a number of reasons for this, because it is difficult to reach to the area in the deep sea and conserve the biodiversity, beside many other reasons. If we see that the total terrestrial area contribute 15.4% to the total terrestrial area of protected in the form of protected area. This table gives the cumulative growth of the protected area network since 1962. The source is UNEP-WCMC 2014. In 2014, again IUCN, United Nations, has made a survey of the total protected area which has been catalogued or inventorized by different countries. If you see comparatively, in 1962, the number of sites were 9,214 and the total kilometer area protected by them were 2,04,000. In the 2014, it was found that it is 2,09,429 are the total number of protected area, and it covers 32 million area. So from 1962 to 2004, the number of sites has been increased as well as total protected area has also been increased. If we see the 5 largest designated protected area, we will found that 2 marine area which are covering an area of more than 1 million square are the largest designated protected area. One is Oceania, which is Natural Park of Coral Sea in France, and the other one is Southern Ocean, South Georgia and South Sandwich Island Marine Protected Area UK, which is also again more than the area is 1 million kilometers square. The other one is Coral Sea Australia, which is again marine, Northeast Greenland terrestrial, and Al Rubal Khali Saudi Arabia, which is terrestrial. Among the top 10 size-wise protected area, among them 8 are marine and only 2 are terrestrial. If we see the protected area network in India, we know that the protection of biological diversity or natural resources, it is deeply imbibed, it is deeply rooted in Indian culture and religious. For protection, if we see the legal binding of protected area network in India, a National Board for Wildlife NBWL, which is chaired by Prime Minister of India, it provides policy framework for wildlife conservation in the country. The National Wildlife Action Plan 2002 to 2016 was adopted in 2002, which emphasized the people's participation and their support for wildlife conservation. If you see India's conservation planning, it is based on the philosophy of identifying and protecting representing wild habitat across all the ecosystem. For example, tiger, elephant, pandas, crocodile, they all are representative of wild habitat across all the ecosystem. The Indian Constitution entails the subject of forest and wildlife in the concurrent list. If you see, the federal ministry act as a guiding torch dealing with the policies and planning of wildlife conservation. The provincial forest departments, they are vested with the responsibility of implementation of national policies and plans which is related to the conservation of biodiversity or conservation of wildlife. If we see the protected area network in India, there are 668 protected areas which has been established. These areas are almost 1,61,221.57 kilometers and they cover 4.9% of total geographical area. The number of national parks in India are 102. There are 515 wildlife sanctuaries, 47 conservation reserve and 4 community reserve. The 39 tiger reserves and 28 elephant reserves have been designated for specific species habitat management of tiger and elephants. UNESCO has designated 5 protected areas as World Heritage Site. If you see, India has categorized the protected areas, namely national park, sanctuaries, conservation reserve and community reserve as the 4th category for protected area. In India, it is home to the largest tiger population. It has assemblage of many globally important endangered species: Asiatic lion, Asian elephant, one-horned rhinoceros, Gangetic river dolphin, snow leopard, Kashmir stag, dugong, gharial, great Indian bustard, lion-tailed markaki, etc. Basically representative of the wilderness area of wildlife species. If you see, the main area which are concerned the management of protected area in India is habitat loss and fragmentation, basically by anthropogenic activity, over exploitation of the resources, overuse of biomass resources. There are livelihood of Indian villagers or people depend on forests, their resources, and poaching and illegal trade is also a threat to the wildlife, beside the climatic change, population, pollution, and habitat fragmentation and degradation. So, to sum up, that the protected area are the cornerstone of biological diversity. They provide us not only the diversity, but they provide us the various ecosystem services, cultural services, religious services, and food security, and they also contribute for the sustainable development. If we protect the habitat, this is the most effective method of preserving biodiversity. The identification or the prioritization of the protective areas can be done on the basis of utility, on the basis of endemism, and there are different reasons for setting up protected area. The protected areas can be managed by monitoring, by maintaining the habitat, management of people, indigenous people. For monitoring, we need to have or manager had to continuously monitor the source of water, number of endemic species, number of rare species, and the habitat need to be monitored regularly, whether there is natural calamities, there is fire, grazing, or falling of the tree, and the indigenous community and their resource harvesting or exploitation of resources or use of resource has to be monitored regularly as far as management is concerned. In present, the forest, savanna, grassland, mountains, desert, wetlands, ice caps, lakes, and sea, all they represents the protected area. The protected area vary greatly in size. The IUCN has categorized the protected area into 6 categories, but all the country, it's a voluntary, different countries has adopted different legislation for conservation on the basis of protected area, and the outcome of various type of governmental and other initiative determine the protection of or management of a protected area. So, at last, I would like to say that the protected area are cornerstone of biodiversity conservation and provide us immense benefits for not only our present generation, but for our future generation as well. Thank you.